menu of the invitation given by a Roman rich man in his house has survived to the present day. Even the introduction part alone covers more than an entire large meal for most modern people. This introduction, called gustaccio, is the preparation for the Moroccan meal, and in the record, he read the following: wine, herb, garlic, cheese, poached mushrooms, boiled fresh cabbage and Brussels coleslaw, sausage and sausage varieties, pickled fish, snails, olives, and bread. It was served to the rich Romans who were waiting for the meal to pass the time, and believe me, it would be the last stage with great abundance. The second stage, the main course, is the main course: various roasted beef or poultry, ostrich stews, fried calamari, fried fish. In the third stage, egg pudding, omelette, soufflé, fig, apple, apricot, cherry, date, peanut, almonds, walnuts, folan, Russian wine, and a dessert similar to today's pudding. In addition, perfumes were sprinkled around that would change the atmosphere of the room. The heads and feet of the guests were decorated with wreaths made of flowers. The guests would elect a banquet king among themselves, that is, the head of the guest, Manchester, and the chosen person would determine how much the wine should be mixed with water during the wine feast. The most important of these was by drinking the wine in one gulp after the person raised his glass with profino, tibibus being, that is, wishes for goodness and health. Theaters, gladiator shows, music concerts, and dancing girls would add entertainment to the environment while eating. Although it was rare, pornography was performed by slaves. We also know that shows were held. Presentations and activities could vary depending on the wealth of the host. For example, a cake or pastry would be brought for the most important subject to cut. And while the cake was being cut, the sparrows that came out would fly and scatter in all directions. It was done to entertain the guests as one of the surprises of the night. After the birds were freed, the cake, we know from kitchen records that a Roman rich man cooked 18 pigs at the same time. Each of the pigs was cooked according to taste at different times and temperatures, and it was only made for a table of 6 people. This was eaten so much at these tables that they vomited, and then there were jars to continue eating. There was no special vomiting jar. However, slaves who knew their masters knew what they would need, so they kept a container like a toilet bowl ready, so that those who wanted to vomit could keep up with their master's speed. Since it would be too hypothetical to bother with going to the toilet, the Roman toilet immediately went to the other side of the room during the conversation. He would urinate in his bowl and then continue eating. Sometimes a part of the room was reserved for the toilet with a curtain. Containers filled with water were carried around by slaves to wash hands. Everyone easily washed their hands in the same water. If the household was crowded, there were several cooks, each of whom had mastered different culinary arts. In today's restaurants, the cuisine is different. In addition to the waiters, who work with chefs who are skilled in their fields, starting menus, such as cakes, there is a trained cutter, that is, 8 saurus, who prepares the food into pieces, suitable for eating with a spoon or fingers. They were very simple places. It is difficult to see anything other than a wide counter and barbecues. Everything is very practical. Pottery and ladles were hanging on the walls. All of them had a clear location. This is how the Roman rich people usually had their dinners, with residences and lots of conversation. The most important food establishments in the city were undoubtedly the bakeries, which were owned by guilds. The bakeries affiliated with them would be very large scale because they had to feed the city population of up to 1 million, and bread was the basic food of the Romans. From time to time, bakeries advertised at events in the agora, and bakers tried to direct customers to them by distributing free bread at festivals. If you had a large bakery, you were probably among the rich people of the city. It means entertainment life in Rome. The Romans were people who were fond of entertainment. We can say that despite all the difficulties of the ancient world, they were not unhappy people. Every period was a festival, games, shows, and various entertainment elements. The entertainment of the Romans was carried out with both the activities carried out by the Roman administration to please the people and the own work of various organizations. In addition to religious festivals in the world, there were also parties and theaters in the ceilings. Of course, the shows that the people looked forward to with the greatest excitement were the gladiator games. Free Romans, who wanted to make money as slaves or earn money, could participate with gladiator teams. These games did not always result in death. They were more like sword and shield shows. As a matter of fact, human life was at that time. It was also paid, and if someone died in every show, no one could make money from this business. The Colosseum, which was completed in 80 AD, created a revolution for fights, because the arena was built using enormous engineering with pipes and insulation systems that could be filled with water. Even the naval battle shows, called pneumachia, could be revived in large scale. Colosseum battles were generally carried out in the form of reenacting the great games in Roman history. Carthaginian Hannibalians, conquest of Britain, were the most portrayed historical events, and each time ended with the victory of the Romans. After the sea battles were over, the water in the arena was again drawn into tanks through canals. Female gladiators were also encountered among the gladiators, although they were not seen very often. Records of 20-30 female gladiators have been reached. During the imperial period, the Senate could not provide financial support for more than 2 gladiator shows per year, in accordance with the laws, but there was no limit to the gladiator shows that the emperor would perform. However, they considered the gladiator games as rare and extraordinary events. For example, Emperor Augustus only organized gladiator shows during his reign of more than 60 years. Later in the process, there was a steady increase both in the amount of playdays held in Rome and in the regularly scheduled gladiator games. By 354 AD, there were 6 days a year with theatrical entertainments, 102 with horse races, 64 with gladiator shows, and 10 days with monster hunts. For example, in addition to the Charlotte races and gladiator fights, which can be shown as the most popular of the games, many different types of games and sports were held, such as wild animal fights, running races, boxing, wrestling, various athletics competitions, and the Trojan Games. They were brought before the gladiators, and their executions were carried out in this way. Although it is thought that the Romans' chariot races were inspired by wrestling and boxing competitions, it can be said that the gladiator games were invented by the Romans themselves. Greek sports had a great influence on the organization of athletics and running races. However, there is an important thing that should be noted in this regard. The point is that the Romans were largely indifferent to Greek sports, such as athletics and running, and especially during the Republic period and the first years of the imperial period. These sports were not popular with the public. In this regard, Emperor Augustus said that he did not participate in Greek games or races, and did not reward the winners of the competitions appropriately. The reason for this situation encountered by the Romans is the element of nudity contained in Greek sports. Gutmann explains this situation quite simply with the statement that the image of a naked runner seemed ridiculous to them. Emperor Augustus, also known as Octavius, is considered the first emperor of the novel, and for a period of time he oppressed the Roman Senate. Emperor Augustus, who was described as cold as an iceberg and dignified as Aristotle, was also known for his conservatism, took a stand against nudity, banned prostitution for a period, and made it compulsory for women to marry and give birth to children. Interestingly, the city of Ephesus was under Roman rule. In the examinations made on the bodies of the Ephesian gladiators from the ancient times, it was seen that their diet was vegetarian. Drinks made from barley and a kind of vegetable mixture have greatly changed what we know about the diets of the Ephesian gladiators. While they were expected to have a more protein-based diet in order for their wounds to heal faster, it was discovered that they had a vegetable and grain-based diet. It carries winged gladiators to an important place in the history of medicine. Another important part of the entertainment life in Rome was the special rooms in the homes of the rich Romans, which were built only for men to hold feasts with their friends. The custom of eating, which was adopted from the 6th century BC onwards because it was thought to be luxurious and ostentatious, was taken from the East, from Lydia or the Persians. Only the man of the house and his guests could attend such meals. While they ate separately, the woman of the house and the children gathered around the hearth. Although the feast initially emerged for religious reasons, as a banquet given after a war or a hunt, or as a habit of warriors eating together, it dates back to the 5th century BC, along with men's meeting places. Afterwards, it becomes public and becomes a habit rather than a luxury. The spaces seen in vase depictions from the 7th century BC are found in the houses of administrators and aristocrats, if not in every home. The most important furniture of these places was made of stone, wood, or bronze, that is, a sofa-like reclining chair, small space, or with a round table. The standing table, like the klein, was one of the indispensable items of these places. The table was easily carried because it had 3 legs. It was brought with the food on it during the meal, and when the meal was over, it could be pushed under the klein. In some descriptions, we also see the footstool, called vitrivius andron, which was used as a step to climb to the klein, and on which shoes were placed when lying down with the klein. Men's invitations are held in large rooms that can easily accommodate 4 people and have enough space for services and entertainment. According to traditions, it is not customary for the host to be present at such invitations. Since men live in these places without being disturbed by women, their name is andron. Taverns are one of the important entertainment venues in taverns. The customers, who were usually male, drank wine and beer in series. They watched the shows of singers and dancers. They gambled using stones or dice. They probably spent the end of the night with prostitutes. While women generally had fun at family events, places such as the ceiling were offered to the service of men. In Rome, every month and week of the year. Since some days were dedicated to the gods, religious festivals could be seen at any time. In these festivals, street artists, theater artists, mimes, singers performed, and the shows were open to the public free of charge because they were financed by a Roman rich. Slaves and prostitutes could not participate in religious festivals. The festival dates, sponsors of the festival, and who could not participate were determined by the official in the forum. It was announced that fast food vendors, dessert sellers, and sellers who put small toys for children on their stalls would add color to the festivals. Games and sports shows, which can be said to have a very important position in social and political life in Rome, were carried out mainly for pagan religious purposes, such as honoring the gods during the kingdom times, while in the Republic. Since the period, it has begun to be carried out for various purposes, such as preventing large segments of the society from creating unrest and making political demands, celebrating great military successes, and gaining the support of the public. For example, according to a Roman legend, in order to honor Mars, the god of war, who is thought to be the father of Romulus, the founder and first king of Rome. Many other games and shows were organized in the name of God, such as shows called Equuria, races held in the name of the god Jupiter, Floria games held in the name of the goddess Floria, Magalesian games held in honor of the goddess Cybele, the Ceres festival held in honor of the goddess Cereson. Successfully expresses that for a long time we have not been able to sell our vote to anyone. Our people have long since shed their worries, because once the authorities, the axes and the legions, and the people who gave everything, now they limit themselves and only greedily want 2 things: bread and entertainment. Education in Rome. Ancient Rome. While education in the early Republic was an informal familial education, it progressed to a system-based education in the Republican and imperial periods. The Roman education system was based on the Greek education system, and most of the private teachers in the Roman education system were Greek slaves or Greek freedmen. The education curriculum used in Rome was Roman. It was copied in all the provinces and became the basis for the education systems of later Western civilization. Until the 2nd century AD, organized education was relatively rare, and we have only a few glimpses of the Roman educational process practiced by this time, which was provided to Roman children due to the extensive power the paterfamilias had over Roman families. The level and quality of education varied greatly from family to family, but Roman culture later evolved to expect fathers to educate their children to some degree. A full and advanced education was expected of any Roman wishing to enter politics, the University of Rome, and later the summit of the Roman Empire. The Roman education system gradually took its final form during the reign. Public schools were established that gave students pocket money, but there were very few educational institutions that provided free public education. Both boys and girls were educated, although not necessarily together. The Roman education system was gradually phased out, very similar to the system that prevails in the modern world. Quintillus, one of the educators in Rome, accepted the importance of starting education as early as possible, and stated that memory exists not only in young children, but also in everyone, but that the information learned at that age is especially permanent. A Roman student. Just like today, a student prepares from primary school to secondary school and then to university. Progressed in similar schools, they were generally exempt from education on Lundia days, a kind of weekend every 8 days grade passing, depended on ability rather than age. Great importance was given to a student's command of interest, that is, his innate gift to learn, in short, his intelligence, as well as the student's ability to receive high-level education. The basis of ancient Roman education was, first of all, the home and the family, where children received their so-called moral education. While Greek boys received their education primarily in society, the first and most important educators of a Roman child were almost always their parents. During the early Republic, parents taught their children the agricultural, domestic, and military skills necessary for living. Roman education was carried out almost exclusively at home, under the rule of paterfamilias. Educated children were usually taught by their parents, or the highest-ranking male in the family, to understand simple business transactions and to have sufficient literacy and arithmetic skills to count, weigh, and measure. Men like Senator Cato, the famous defender of the Republic, adhered to this Roman tradition and took their role as teachers very seriously. In old age, Otto not only raised his children to be hard-working good citizens and responsible Romans, but also his son's reading teacher, a law professor, and his athletic trainer. He taught not to ride but to box, to withstand both heat and cold, and to swim well. Job training was also emphasized. Boys gained valuable experience through apprenticeships, but the role of mothers as moral educators and character developers of their children cannot be ignored. Even Cornelia, the mother of Gratius, was born in Africa. It is seen as the most important factor that enabled the development of his son's famous good speaking and oratory skills. Perhaps the most important role of parents in their children's education was to instill in them respect for tradition, as well as a solid understanding of pietas and devotion to duty. For a boy, this is loyalty to the state; for a girl, loyalty to her husband and family. As the Roman Republic transitioned towards more systematic education, parents began to hire private tutors for this advanced level of academic education. The Romans began to bring Greek slaves to Rome to further enrich their children's knowledge and potential, but still the Romans always maintained the tradition of pietas and the belief that the father's child's during the Republican or imperial periods. Rome never officially established a state-supported form of primary education. At no point in its history did Rome legally require its people to receive any level of education. It was typical for children from wealthy Roman families to receive their primary education from private teachers. It was also common for children of modest means to be traditionally educated in a type of primary school known as a ludus literas. In such a school, the instructor was known as a literator or literatus, which was generally considered a highly respected title. Apart from the low salaries, there was nothing to prevent a literator from establishing his own school for a ludus. They were never fixed in a specific location. They could be found in a variety of places, from a private residence to a gymnasium, or even on the street. Typically in ancient Rome, primary education focused on daily life reading and writing needs, from students reading and writing letters to syllables, then learning words, and finally memorizing texts and progressed to reading. Most of the texts used in early Roman education were literary texts. These texts were also predominantly poetry. Greek poets such as Homer and Hesiod were often used as lesson examples due to the lack of Roman literature. Roman students were expected to study on their own. They were combined as students came and went at different times throughout the day. As a science, there was no sense of class unity. Young Roman students never faced an examination or written test. Their degree of success was measured by exercise, in which they were corrected or congratulated on their performance. This inevitably created a sense of competition among students. Romans used a competitive education system that allowed the elite to maintain the continuity of their class. He developed a form of social control in which the system required large sums of money to be spent to obtain a good education, which prevented the majority of non-wealthy Roman students from advancing to higher levels of education. Between the ages of 9 and 12, boys from wealthy families would drop out of the education they were receiving by the literator, and their students would learn to write and write. They would begin to study with a dramataios who had mastered the art of literary analysis, improved their speaking skills, and taught them their rich knowledge. They did not know Greek yet. At this point, while the rich boys were being trained by private teachers, the lower-class boys who had completed the Ludu would already be working as apprentices, and the girls, whether rich or poor, did not matter. They would focus on finding a spouse and then having children as soon as possible. Daily activities that included lessons taught by Grammateius included the expressive reading and analysis of poetry. The curriculum was fully bilingual, as students were expected to read and speak both Greek and Latin. Evaluation of a student's performance. It was done instantly and on the spot, according to the standards set by his own Grammateius. Students would complete an exercise, show their results to their instructors, and be corrected or congratulated as necessary by Grammateius, who saw himself as the guardian of the language. Among the famous grammarians, Lucius, who did not hesitate to beat or whip his students to get them home, Obius Pitbullus, and the freed slave Marcus Varius, who was known for his novel practice of pitting students of similar age and ability against each other, by organizing rhetorical contests, and then rewarding the winner, usually with the prize of a rare ancient book, who gained widespread tutelage due to imperial patronage. He demanded enormous fees due to his great prestige in Rome. Hired by Augustus to teach Eden and his grandchildren, Varius Flaccus, even at the height of his career, never had his own classroom. Instead, like many of his fellow teachers, he used privately rented school space, often at very low wages, and rented classroom space wherever he could find it. Other teachers held their classrooms on sidewalks and in Porsches, or they avoided rent and lighting costs by concentrating traffic noise in other public spaces where bad weather was sure to cause problems. Although both literary and documentary sources give varying information on the various titles used for a teacher, and often use the most general terms to describe all teachers, Diocleton by B.C. A price edict issued in 301 shows that such distinctions did exist, and that a teacher should, at least in theory, describe himself as a literator, grammatheus, or return, on maximum wages. This edict fixed the salary of a grammateus at 2 denarius per pupil per month. This edict could not be enforced, was ignored, and was eventually repealed. Children continued to study grammar until they were 14 or 15. At this point, only the rich and most promising students had the opportunity to study rhetoric. It was the final stage in Roman education. Very few boys studied rhetoric. In early Roman history, this was the only way to serve as a lawyer or politician. In the early Roman period, the study of rhetoric was taught not only through the teacher, but also through a student's careful observation of his elders. The practice of rhetoric was practiced by the Greeks before it became an institution in Roman society, and it took a long time to gain acceptance in Rome. Oratory or rhetoric students were important in Roman society due to the constant political strife that occurred throughout Roman history. Young men who studied rhetoric did not just focus on public speaking. These students also learned other subjects such as geography, music, philosophy, literature, mythology, and geometry. Versatile studies provided Roman orators with a more varied education and helped prepare them for future debates. There were two fields of oratory study available to young men, the first of which was the deliberative branch of study, which later advanced its views on the advisability or inadvisability of measures affecting the Roman Senate. The second field of study was much more lucrative and was known as judicial oratory. These orators would later enter important fields in gaining public support, such as criminal law. Public support was very important for a successful political career in Rome. A final level of education was philosophy education. Education in philosophy was clearly Greek, but it was undertaken by many Roman students. To study philosophy, a student had to go to a philosophical center where philosophers taught, usually abroad in Greece. Education in a philosophical school of thought could have added much to Cicero's vaunted great knowledge. However, this education was only limited to the best of the novel. Was visible to the wealthy elite, Romans viewed philosophical education as distinctly Greek, and instead focused their education on establishing schools of law and rhetoric. Sexual life in Rome. Sexual life in ancient Rome had wide range and freedom. Almost every wealthy Roman had a very young age. His male and female slaves were responsible for providing sexual services to him. They could always be together with these slaves at their disposal. In fact, one of the most normal situations of the Roman period was for men to have young boys. This relationship with younger men, with whom they did not have an emotional bond and who were not their age, was seen as masculinity in Roman men. It is a tendency that the majority of people are aware of. In addition, you have to be the active side of the relationship, not the passive one. As long as you comply with these rules, you are free to be with anyone, whether a slave or a sex worker. From time to time, we see that the law of lex scadia comes into play. This law is about sexual assault against a free Roman man. And if you used a free Roman man in a passive sexual sense, you could fall within the scope of this law, but more often than not, the case would be ignored if the victim in question was not well off. Although laws against sexual offenses were enacted from time to time in Rome, they were not generally dominant and concerned only free citizens, no sexual inclinations toward slaves. It is not a crime. In fact, there is no word directly equivalent to homosexual or heterosexual in Latin, the official language of Rome. Every Roman child would wake up at dawn and wear a protective talisman called bulla around his neck as soon as he got out of bed. This talisman would protect him from being sexually untouchable. When he reached the age of majority, he would take this possibility out and step into sexuality under the auspices of Liber, the god of both political and sexual freedom. In the legions, homosexual acts among soldiers were considered a violation of military discipline, and those involved in such acts were subjected to harsh punishments. The Greek historian Polypus wrote about homosexual acts among soldiers in his writings. He reports that he was punished with fusarium, that is, by being canned until death, but the general freedoms granted to men did not apply to women. It was not acceptable for a woman to be the dominant party, according to the ancient Romans, because they saw being the dominant party in a sexual relationship as a symbol of power and power. For most civilizations, anal sex was a thing. Even though it was a taboo, we can say that it was very popular in ancient Rome, so much so that it even had a place in the laws. Emperor Tiberius had slaves who were experts in this field. Young men were trained to satisfy Tiberius' desires, and Tiberius even had a villa built on a whim just for these tasks. In Rome, not only slaves but also gladiators were used as a means of sex and entertainment. Men fighting for their lives in the arena aroused the desires of women in the upper classes. Of course, this caused various scandals to break out. Emperor Mark's wife, Fastunia, was saying yes to gladiators in order to overcome this lust. Fastunia, who consulted an oracle, had sex with a gladiator upon the advice of the oracle, and had that gladiator killed and washed with his blood. She believed that she would be purified from her lust. Immediately after being cleansed with the blood of the gladiator, she had sexual intercourse with Marcus Aurelius. A married woman had to be chaste, and the evasion of a married woman could be punished with death. Gladiators in Rome, so to speak. They were the stars of the society and aroused excitement among women. It was not surprising to see young girls shouting the names of the gladiators during their fights in the arena and handing them notes from behind the cages that opened their breasts for women to see themselves. Meetler, which consists of the phrase, "For a gladiator, he catches the girls with his net with his trident," has survived to this day. This was a graffiti. It was emotional about it. Roman women who were brought up as women must have experienced a shock of conscience if they made a mistake, like cheating. In Rome, great importance was given to the virginity of the woman who was going to get married, and honorable and chaste women were always respected. From this situation, women were respected in society because they were both wives and mothers at the same time. It can be concluded that women will also raise their children well. It is estimated that 15% of women between the ages of 20 and 29 in Rome are widows, and the large age difference between spouses is the biggest reason for the high number of widows. As a matter of fact, in Rome, it was common for old men to marry young girls. It was a behavior, and most women in Rome were widowed by the death of their spouses rather than being widowed by divorce. There was serious social pressure on women who became widows at a young age, especially women who became widows after the death of their spouses and had children were forced to remarry within 2 years because they could not take care of their children, themselves, and women. When they got married, they were under the control of their husband's father. That is, the woman is no longer under the control of her own family, but of her husband's father in the eyes of the law. Because the party that has the final judgment and say in the family is the man, and in some periods, women's disobedience was punished with death. But it was not easy to stand in the way of the entertainment of young Roman girls. Most of the young girls had lovers, and they enjoyed playing sexual games. Even though it was considered shameful, Rome was a society where it was known that the eyes should not see everything. One of the reasons why most of the women died before they even reached the age of 25 is that although the reason is not known exactly, the presence of lead in the water pipes negatively affected the health of women and caused various diseases and even miscarriage. This was an incentive for young Roman girls, who would probably die at or before birth, to live their short lives. Young girls who were eagerly waiting for marriage were often married to old men at a young age, because the death rate among men was high due to wars or disease in Rome. It is thought that a marriage lasts an average of 10 to 15 years. For the Romans, brothels were one of the important elements of daily life. In the places where the rich people of the city lived, there were brothels that appealed to the upper class and that the mob could not enter. In other neighborhoods, there were also brothels where everything was experienced together without even rooms. Watch out at the doors and streets of these brothels. Attractively painted women tried to impress their customers, and among the service providers there were prostitutes, young and old, suitable for various tastes. Prostitutes could not participate in religious events and national festivals because they were excluded from religion. Our information about these women is largely obtained from great Roman writers, especially Louvelets, archaeological studies, and especially the ruins of the Pump. Because the raging explosion that took place here in 79 AD ensured that the ruins remained as they were and survived until today. Brothels were forbidden to open before 3 in the afternoon, and there were also polite prostitutes who appealed to the upper class. These were among the girls born out of wedlock, the daughters of slaves or the girls left on the streets. They were carefully selected and trained by master prostitutes in private schools from the age of 5. They learned beautiful speech, seduction, makeup, physical education, mathematics, literature, poetry, painting, sculpture, and most importantly, the finer points of the art of love. These girls were never exposed to the sun so that their skin would not darken. The masters tried their lovemaking techniques on each other and tried their best. They would train these women without losing sight of even the smallest detail. Those who were very successful in making love to women and those who were more sensitive than that would be taken to a separate room, and their training would be separate from the others. These would then be trained to be able to accompany rich women and widows. Every day, the biggest weapons of prostitutes are their body movements and speech. It was said that women would be made to frown and smile excessively, leaving scars on the corners of their mouths. In addition, since a happy ring was a facial expression that every man was looking for, they were taught to keep a smile on their faces and not to be assertive and stubborn. The virginity of these polite prostitutes was definitely protected because the virginity of their first customers was definitely protected. Being the richest or the person who paid the most money was carefully chosen by their bosses. It was considered a great honor for the girl to do this job for the most money. Girls were never sent to young men, except for the rich ones, because young men are like bulls, they will make you miserable. They said they knew very well what they would get, and the main reason for this was the concern that girls might fall in love with young men. It is believed that the murals unearthed in several buildings in Pompeii depicted exotic and beautiful women serving young customers in brothels. The murals were used to stimulate customers and sometimes even inexperienced. Sometimes rich families would choose polite prostitutes for their boys to have their first experiences. This meant that a man would move up the class and grow up. It was the first step he took to become a strong man. It was strictly forbidden for free citizens to become sex workers. City brothels were very smelly and unhealthy places. In order to be corrected and to partially prevent venereal diseases, it was foretold that artificial streams should be placed in front of the doors, and that men would enter here and be completely cleaned before entering the brothel. Friends, daily life in Rome was briefly like this. Do not think that this is over. We will continue to examine daily life in Rome, section by section, on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe and follow me on Instagram account. See you soon.